Welcome to Making Change Radio here on Radio Fairfax. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me tonight is Melissa Batchelor, PhD. Melissa is the host of the podcast, This is Getting Old, Moving Toward an Age-Friendly World. And tonight we're going to be talking about reimagining long-term care. Welcome to the show, Melissa.
Thank you, Catherine. It's good to see you again, or hear from you again.
So let's give folks who are listening a little bit of your background, because it's quite remarkable. Not only are you a nurse educator, you're a researcher, you are a policy advocate, you also advise on policy. You're teaching at George Washington University. You've also developed your own methods of hand feeding, which you are training people in different places around the country to use. So as a gerontologist, somebody who studies the issues of older people, I think we're all interested to know, when we talk about reimagining long-term care, what it's going to look like after COVID. And I think that comes about because COVID has shown a very bright light on especially nursing facilities around the country and the devastation that a virus wrought in these locations. But there's just a lot more to long-term care than nursing homes as well. So we leave it to you to kind of take us on this journey of how we should be looking at reimagining this.
Right. So I think one of the first things you have to understand is kind of what our current system of long-term care looks like. And when you say the term long-term care, what that means is at what point in time in your life do you need someone to help you to manage things? Either, typically more along the lines of like your activities of daily living. So like bathing, grooming, getting dressed, that type of stuff. But it could be even as much as like needing somebody to help you buy your groceries, or prepare meals for you because you're not able to physically, or mentally do that for yourself anymore. So there's this continuum of when you begin to need services, and long-term care runs from that point of time all the way through the end of life. And, whereas in childhood, you have certain developmental milestones that you meet. So first you can feed yourself, and then you learn to walk, and then you can use the bathroom, and then you can dress yourself. And at certain points in your life, you hit those milestones. Well, what happens with aging is that everybody's doing it differently because it depends on your lifestyle. It depends on how well you did in your life with your finances. It has to do with where you live in the country. It has to do with what your own personal beliefs are about aging. And so you have people with kind of there's not one trajectory of decline that everyone goes through. So there are all these variables that come into play, but all of them determine what part of long-term care you're going to need. So when you think about, and I will tell you, the majority of people in nursing homes have kind of been highlighted, and all the problems with nursing homes, they've been highlighted during COVID, but only 4 to 5% of people over the age of 65 will ever require skilled nursing care, because when you get to that point, you are very sick, you're very frail, you're very debilitated. And all of those reasons are exactly why, even though long-term care staff and residents only make up 8% of all the total cases of COVID in the United States, they account for 40% of the deaths. So they are the highest risk group, but that's not normal. The majority of older adults don't do that. So you have this other 95% of people, and most of them live in their community. And so you have home-based and community-based services. So that could be like home health care. It could be Meals on Wheels, so your local area agency on aging. You could probably hire like a personal care assistant so that you can age in place within your own home. And so that's one kind of group of services. And then when you can't live on your own anymore, you maybe would buy into like a CCRC, or a continuing care retirement community. And that type of model has independent living, but also assisted living, and then skilled nursing care. And so as you progress through your life, if you become more debilitated, you move to the next level until you end up on hospice and palliative care if you're fortunate enough. And I mean that truly. I'm not being sarcastic, because we don't refer people to hospice and palliative care quick enough in this country. And then you also have independent assisted living facilities and skilled nursing facilities. And so those are all of the kind of different places where long-term care can take place. And all of that is driven. I mean, I've had family members ask me for years, so what are my options? And the first question is, what do your finances look like? So payment drives everything, because I don't need to go down the road of a CCRC if you don't have, $100,000 to buy into that model of care because it's private pay, versus if you are if you're on Medicaid within your state. I mean, so it's very different. And how do you help people navigate these complex systems when the majority of Americans, I don't think, really understand what long-term care is and all the different places, and then all the different payment sources that are attached to that. So I think a lot of people think that Medicare, that is an age entitlement program. So when you turn 65, you have to enroll in Medicare. I think a lot of people think that Medicare pays for long-term care. There have been surveys that have been done. So that's what most people think. And Medicare is your hospital-based insurance. So Medicare is only going to pay for if you're hospitalized. If you have a 3-day inpatient stay, you will trigger your skilled nursing home rehabilitation benefit, which is about 120 days. But then after that, Medicare doesn't pay for your long-term care anymore, regardless of what setting you're in. So then it depends on what your functional level is. So how well can you walk and feed yourself and get dressed, all those things that we talked about in the beginning. That then drives where your next placement is, because you have to spend your personal assets through a process called a spend down until you qualify for Medicaid, which is the state-based kind of need-based payment system that the states that they manage. And so typically nursing homes are funded by Medicare and Medicaid. And for most state budgets, of the whole Medicaid budget, about 30% of it is spent on long-term care for older adults who are basically indigent and don't have, a family member that they can live with, or their care needs are so great that they outweigh what the family, can provide. So the bulk of long-term care in this country is actually being delivered in the community by family caregivers and friends. And that creates a whole host of issues. When we look at just the amount of caregiving hours for family caregivers of people with dementia, the number of hours that they provide, and it's like $1 trillion is the cost that they save the country. But there's really no one that could provide it except for family members, because we're not set up as a society to deal with that level of care needs for an aging population.
And there's just there's so many factors that impact this too. I mean, so for those of you who are just joining us, this is Making Change Radio here on Radio Fairfax. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and we are talking with MelissaB, PhD, who is a gerontologist. And we are talking about reimagining long-term care. So we talk about the fact that people are not, I think most people are not aware that such a small percentage of older adults live in a facility right there at home. And so mobility, medical needs, but also the ability of your family members to take care of you. And I mentioned at the top of the show that you do research and you are an advocate, and you also advise on policy. And so one of the things this country is struggling with too is paid family leave. And the fact that we are one of the few, really the only large, developed, wealthy country that has no mandated leave. And people think about that for new parents. But the fact of the matter is, if you've got an older parent, a parent who is in a crisis, that you need to be that family caregiver. And that's not just for women. There are plenty of men who are in caregiver roles too. If their company or their business does not allow them time off to do these critical care needs for their parents, for their grandparent, then, how is the community, starting with an immediate family, supposed to grapple with keeping family members at home, where it costs the government less money. It's a better quality of life in many instances. But if there is not support for family caregiving, how do we keep older family members at home?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a struggle, and it's a huge challenge for a lot of families. And you think about the number of nuclear families that don't live next to, you know, the extended family model where everyone kind of lived within a block of each other. That's not true for the majority of Americans. And so you have, you know, you could be living in California and trying to care for a parent, you know, in North Carolina. And there are, you know, private services that you can hire, you know, like Home Instead, and there are, you know, there are different organizations that can help you with some of that caregiving, those caregiving needs, if you're not there to provide it for yourself. But you're right. I mean, if you're the one that has to take off of work to help them get to the doctor, you know, if it becomes quite a big issue. And I'll tell you, the biggest majority of family caregivers in this country right now are millennials. And you think about, you know, how hard it is for that generation to have, you know, I just read something the other day that there are more adults between 18 and 25 living with their parents and grandparents than have ever done that before. And part of that makes sense to me too, because I was like, well, you know, the kids that were going to college didn't get to go because of COVID, you know.
Yeah.
But then you also have how expensive everything is. But in some ways, if you have to live with your parent or your grandparent, at least you're there to help provide care. But then that person, that millennial, can't go out and get a job and work. And so it's kind of like both people then begin to live off of what the parents and grandparents have. But then, you know, you have that whole generation of kids that aren't going to have, you know, they won't have been in the workforce, you know. So there are a lot of tough decisions that have to be made. And was talking to somebody, I was at a meeting this weekend, and they were talking about the amount of financial exploitation that's going on right now. I mean, I know that scams are a big deal, but there are a lot of people now that are providing care for their older family members, and they're just exploiting all of their, they just take over financial power of attorney. And, you know, the older adult, I mean, they're in a frail, vulnerable position. So there are just so many bad things that can happen that I think that as a country, we need to pay attention to what are the different places and payment systems that are in place for long-term care, and then what do we need to do to make it better? Because what we have right now isn't ideal. I think if you're in the wealthy crowd, it works, you know, life always goes a little bit easier for you because you can pay someone to come in, and you can pay to have 24/7, you know, care. And, you know, but for the majority of Americans, that's just not going to be feasible. And so what are the policies and things that need to be in place in order to improve all of the different long-term care options?
You know, and I think, and we've heard forever, I've heard it all my life, that people do not plan for their retirement or their old age soon enough, early enough. Because when you are a millennial and you're in your first job, you know, and it's kind of like 401k, like, why would I put money there? And because people just can't see far enough down the road to understand why you have to start early to be prepared later. And it's just a mindset. Young people think they're invincible, right?
Yeah. Well, I tell my students, and I've been telling them this since I've been an educator for 15 years. I was like, I know that you and your parents probably think that you need to be saving for retirement, but you shouldn't think that way, because what you're actually saving for is your long-term care. And so, you know, thinking about saving for retirement and you turn 65 and you stop working, you know, that's a really bad strategy, because you need to remain active and engaged. You know, it doesn't mean that you have to work, you know, 24/7 in a very stressful job, but you need to transition your retirement, you know, 65 and older, into something else that's productive, that keeps you moving, so that you don't turn into a frail older adult. And so really your job is to save money in case you get sick. You know, but this is also why we're in such a state of affairs right now, is because, you know, when Medicare and Medicaid were kind of developed, people just didn't live that long. And now we have people living with disability for 20 years or more. And that impacts their ability to earn an income. They blow through their savings. And then where's that final, safety net? And so that's why states are ending up, with a 30% of their Medicare budget dedicated to long-term care. So
yeah,
there's a lot to think about.
There is a lot to think about, and we're living longer. You're right. And I remember years ago hearing that the greatest threat to women's longevity was their financial health. And at the time, I'm like, what? And it's like women historically had been caregivers. They stayed home when their kids were young. That put them behind the 8 ball as far as earning an income. They were not on level with men their age who had no break in their careers. When they took time off to have children, that set them back. That was sort of like, the mommy impact. And they don't put enough away, especially women who haven't been in the workforce. They don't even have Social Security earnings, right? And so
I can tell you a very large bracket of women, just because we are primarily a female-dominated profession, but nurses actually save more money than any other profession within women.
Because
and I was like, because we see what happens.
Because you see what happens, but you hear what I'm saying, right? So you live to be 95 years old, and you didn't have a career, and your Social Security earnings, they aren't there. And then what do you do if you live to be very old? Even if you don't need skilled nursing care, let's just say you need support to stay safe and healthy at home in your house. It's like, what do you do when you were that woman who didn't have the financial wherewithal to plan for long-term care? So this is Making Change Radio here on Radio Fairfax. And our questions are being answered tonight by Melissa Batchelor, PhD, a gerontologist who actually has her own podcast called This Is Getting Old, Moving Towards an Age-Friendly World, which you can find any place where you find your podcasts. So let's talk about that. If we're going to reimagine how long-term care looks, how do we help not only overhaul what we have now, but move upstream to how people should be more carefully planning and imagining what their older years are going to look like?
Right. So actually, I think it's a area that's actually ripe for innovation. And we do need younger people to pay attention and to become interested. And I actually did a program at GW called ICOR, Innovation Corps, through the National Science Foundation. And I was working with a group of biomedical engineering students, and they were very interested in creating products that helped people to age in place and improve quality of life. So, if it's something that if you want a career, for the rest of your life, figure out how to help people age well in place. And there's all kinds of technology needs. There's all kinds of, products and services that people need. So, but we just need to be more innovative and more interested in improving the quality of life for older adults, because you're right, you could spend your entire career and then the one that it benefits is yourself, because you designed it, yourself. I actually remember telling somebody, I did an interview a while ago, and I was talking about, when I first got into long-term care, I was like, this is terrible. We need to do something about this. But in long-term care, the turnover rate's about 100%. It's actually 110%. Wow. It's the highest turnover rate of any industry. And so people just churning and burning. They were just coming through and on their way out because it was such a difficult job and there was so much wrong with it that people were like, this is nuts. I'm not going to stay here. And I thought to myself, well, if you leave because I don't like what I see, then it's never going to get better. And so if you look at nursing homes and you look at assisted livings and you look at anything related to aging, and you're like, that's just terrible. Well, come up with an idea, figure out how to make that better. That could become your life's passion. So for me, that's what happened. I was the student that said, I'm never going to work in a nursing home and I'm never going to work with older adults. And then about a month before graduation, my mom's like, "Hey, I got you a job in a nursing home." I was like, "I'll take it."
Right.
And then
Practical,
I've
right?
never, and yeah, and then I've never left. So I've continued throughout my career to figure out, how do I take the next degree or the next job position, and how do I continue to make long-term care better? And we just need more bright minds and innovators, to help us, and from different industries. It's not just healthcare. We need people in housing, transportation, businesses. We need all of these sectors to come together, because together, along with technology and redoing our financing systems, that's what it's going to take to get us where we need to go, so that the future of long-term care is a lot brighter than it is today.
And that you bring up something really interesting, because today's generation of older Americans are not digital natives. And so they struggle with things like how to use a smartphone or how to use an app. But coming along, today's millennials are the first, like my children are the first sort of young people who started using computers and smartphones. So as they age, there's a lot more opportunity to actually use technology in a different way for people who aren't going to struggle with how to use technology.
Yeah. So, this technology stuff is amazing. I mean, there was an innovation by Marilyn Rance. She was just inducted as a living legend in the American Academy of Nursing, and she had a program called Tiger House, and it's basically building environments where technology helps people, to age in place and also predict when people are going to get sick. And I actually heard about another company up in Maine, I think last year, where they can predict when, like, if you had heart failure, that all the different smart devices in the home that measure, did you take your medication? They weigh you. If you gained 5 pounds overnight, it sends an alert to this algorithm who's like, hey, you didn't take your medicine. You've gained 5 pounds. You need to take your medicine a double dose today to prevent them going into heart failure. So this technology then can predict up to 2 weeks ahead of time before someone would have ended up in the hospital. It can help them auto correct by triggering, doing memory, helping them to remember to do what they need to do, and or recognize warning signs to connect them to a provider. But even having like sensors in the home that measure how fast someone's walking. When your gait slows down, that's one of the first things, one of the first predictors that you're becoming ill. Maybe you're getting a bladder infection, or some type of, something's happening with you. But technology, I think, will help us and help older adults, to age better and to be able to stay in their homes. You think about, robots. There was a movie, I think it was called Henry, but this robot helped this older adult who had a little bit of, dementia, but he'd always been a jewelry thief. But he and this robot like carried out this final thief, or this final thing. But whereas he couldn't remember what he had done, the robot did. And so then he had to make the decision to like wipe the memory of the robot, like to reset. So you think about all the different.
I know, what a cool premise. I have not heard this movie, but I'm going to go look for it. So for those of you who are just joining us, this is Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and we're talking with Melissa Bachelor, PhD, and we are talking about long-term care. And technology is important. There are things now that are voice commanded. People do have Alexa and Google in their homes so that they can get the weather. They can make a remote phone call even. I mean, I see some of the leaps forward that way, being able to order something, your groceries from Amazon, just by talking to Alexa, as being a real boon to seniors, as long as it doesn't get derailed. Because again, I can see where that could also go very badly, right? So on one side is like, this is such an asset unless something goes terribly wrong, in which case it could be a disaster.
Right. And I was in a meeting recently where somebody said, that the voice activated technologies, they are where the future is because of the difficulty in like navigating apps and figuring things out. I can tell you that we just got a new refrigerator this weekend, and it has like the smart panel in it. And, I'm trying to like navigate the touch screen, and my 14-year-old standing there, and he goes, "Mom, just do this." I'm like, if you would just calm down. And I'm like, you know what? It's already happening. I mean, he's, I'm not even 50. He's 14. He thinks he can navigate this thing more than me. And it is voice activated, but it'll help you plan your meals and send your shopping, send the ingredients to a shopping list, and then it will send it to Instacart, and they would deliver my groceries. So, but again, if you're 85, 90 years old, like that is such a foreign
concept
way to live, that that there is this digital divide. So how do you help the current group that's older, and but then also thinking towards like what should the future look like? I think you and I talked about automated cars,
right?
That would certainly help with transportation issues. Transportation is actually one of the biggest challenges for a lot of older adults. And you think about the role of telehealth, that's going to be a game changer. So that's going to be a positive thing that comes out of COVID, because what's had to happen is Medicare, has had to pivot to allow, providers to bill for telehealth. Hopefully these things won't go away. You think about the number of advanced practice nurses whose state scope of practice has changed, and a lot of barriers to practice, full scope of practice that used to exist, have gone away during COVID. And so we need to keep the parts of these models that work and that improve aging and long-term care. But again, paying attention to the flip side of that, because if you're only doing telehealth, then you can't get labs that way, and you might miss somebody that's beginning to have, an exacerbation of a chronic illness that might end up in the hospital. But how do we take the best parts of technology and then make them accessible for everyone? I think those are some of the biggest challenges.
Those are the big questions, and one that more people need to be asking. So many things steal our attention on a daily basis, so many things, that we are not necessarily seeing this as the urgent issue that it is. But these are important questions, not just for the older people who live among us as our neighbors and in our communities today, but because we will all be consumers of this. We are all going to get old. It is inevitable as the sun rising and setting in every day. And so what we're talking about on this show today is something that everyone needs to care about, because it will impact all of us. So I hope our listeners are going to join us after this break here on Making Change Radio, here on Radio Fairfax.
This is Radio Fairfax, a public access cable and internet station provided by Fairfax Public Access, a 501c3 organization in Fairfax County, Virginia.
Social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Okay, men, this is your time. Maybe you didn't choose this, but you're here now. You're gonna go out there and be an all-star caregiver. Cook, clean, be there emotionally and physically. You gotta dig deeper. Drive them to physical therapy, doctor's appointments, because that's what caregivers do. Don't give up. Show the world that you're tougher than tough. Caregiving is tougher than tough. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. They can help save lives by not having play dates. That's right. By replacing get-togethers with virtual play dates and video chats, they can help slow the evil spread of germs. And if your superheroes do go outside, make sure they continue their superhero wing by staying 6 feet away from others to protect everyone in America land. Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
Want to hear what there is in jazz besides usual big names? Come listen to The Outer View, where you'll hear vocalists, pianists, jazz rock, jazz from foreign countries, and much more, going all the way from the mainstream to the cutting edge. The exploring happens on The Outer View with Jerry Howard, Tuesdays 2 to 3 on Radio Fairfax.
Welcome back to Making Change Radio here on Radio Fairfax. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me tonight is Melissa Batchelor, PhD. She is the host of her own podcast, This is Getting Old, Moving Towards an Age-Friendly World, and you can find that podcast any place that you find your other podcasts. And please subscribe because Melissa's talking about issues, as I said before the break, we all need to care about because at some point we will all be grappling with issues of long-term care. It is inevitable. And so, Melissa, let's talk a little bit about some of the things that COVID has shown us, changes that have been made that were made out of necessity, but have shown us that they are both good, they are practical, they are effective, and that they're probably here to stay.
Right. So we, just mentioned, some of the different scope of practice for advanced practice registered nurses. A lot of states have lifted a lot of the requirements for requiring a supervising physician, not being able to bill Medicare under their own provider number. So, a lot of these things have been a lot of the barriers that nurses have been advocating for 20 years. Some of them have just gone away in states. And so I'm hoping, but what it has done is it's increased access to care for people needing primary care. And I do think that nursing in this country, we're 4 million strong. We're the largest healthcare workforce. We're the most trusted for, 18 years in a row now. And, it's because nurses actually want you to stay healthy and want you to get better. And so, as a profession, we need to learn how to step up, into that as well. But so we have, advanced practice nurses and their change of scope of practice. We also have, all the restrictions that have been lifted around telehealth. And so that has allowed people, to be able to go to the doctor and be seen without having to travel. And so if the biggest challenge for an older adult is transportation, at least every other visit, you can, have a telehealth visit. Your family members could be telehealth, can join you in that telehealth visit. Also, and that helps with continuity of information, and coordination of care. And I think that a lot of older adults have learned how to use technology when they may have been more resistant to it, prior to COVID, because, as we were talking, if you didn't believe in, using Zoom or FaceTime or some type of virtual visit with your family before, right now, now it's a necessity. And I do think that maybe people are learning that technology has the ability to build community and that you can have relationships. I can tell you when my kids were young, and so Olivia's 18 now, she was like 3 maybe. Their dad had a job over in South Africa, and he sent us this Apple computer, those things that used to look like eggs.
Yeah.
And they would FaceTime. This was so she's 2002, probably like 2006. And he sent this computer and he's like, oh, I want to FaceTime. And so they would interact just like most of us are doing now. But before they would say goodbye, my little daughter would, and actually her older brother, they'd both lean in and hug the monitor. And at the time I was like, that is so sad. He should be here. This is just sad. This is the state of parenting today. But the flip side of that was it was meeting their emotional needs. It let them stay in touch. And I think that's what, as a society, we're finding out that, while we do prefer face-to-face, in a time where we have to stay socially distanced and apart, you can still, at least see and blow kisses and, and hear each other's voices and see each other's facial expressions. So while not ideal, it does allow for families to stay in communication. I know that for my grandmother in a nursing home, FaceTime's been the only way that my mom's been able to see her now for over, probably 230 days. They did start to allow face-to-face visits maybe about a month ago in North Carolina. But for 6 months, the nursing homes in this country were shut down with no access. And so technology, so Grandma Trudy, she's 91, but she knows how to oops, sorry, my phone just
technology,
said they
right?
about Grandma Trudy. Yeah. But Grandma Trudy can FaceTime, and so that's something we didn't think was going to happen.
Right. And so how many of us, I have attended my great nephew's christening that was live streamed from the church in Brunswick, Georgia. People have been to Zoom weddings this year. We pulled off a surprise birthday party for the executive director of Grand Involved this year, a surprise birthday party on Zoom. So we are limited only by our imagination, but it has been a great way of keeping older people safe and still letting them be connected. And you're right, it is possible to foster and to meet people's social, emotional needs via a screen. And a lot of people didn't believe that until we were forced to do it because there was not a safe option otherwise.
Right. That's true. And I think that type of innovation and, thinking, about the future and what long-term care needs to look like, I think that we need to bring, the best and the brightest ideas together, just so that people have more options and that people are focused on it and trying to make a difference. So you brought up Grand Involved, when we think about housing, everyone has a traditional idea of how we should, live in our communities, single dwelling home or a condo. And, I don't see, somebody was talking the other day about if you built an intergenerational development, so you had where you purposefully put together, college age kids with older adults, and you and I talked about even for single family homes, if you had like a mother-in-law suite, that there are people 65 and older that maybe don't have family that live close to them. And they also don't really want to live by themselves. And then you have this, the young family now with kids in virtual school and everyone's trying to work from home. And so you think about how each of those generations could help each other out with childcare, with cooking, with kind of managing the home. And so how do we think about these different either developments or housing units? How can we build that in for people that don't even know that they need it yet?
Well, my big idea, because we kind of touched briefly on autonomous vehicles and the fact that autonomous vehicles will be a transportation solution for many people, but at some future point when nobody needs to own a car, and why would we pay for a car if you can just have it on demand at the touch of a button? All of these 2-car garages on homes across America, I figure there's going to be a contracting boom for people who just convert your garage. Like, what are you going to do with your garage? How about you make like an apartment in your garage, right? So that you can have somebody live with you, whoever that is. Turn your garage into its own little separate apartment so that people can live with you. So
we could use our dating apps to do the matching.
That's right. That's right. For those of you just joining us, this is Making Change Radio, and I'm your host, Catherine Reed. We're here on Radio Fairfax with Melissa, Bachelor, PhD, who is a gerontologist and an innovative thinker and somebody who's far ahead of the rest of us in trying to figure out how we need to reimagine long-term care, because we're all going to get there sooner or later, and we need to actively be advocating for better practices for how we deal with aging people in our communities, whether it's a family member, it's our neighbors. It's just the fact that every day we encounter people in our community who are older, and many of them are isolated. And talking about Grand Involved, that organization was founded to put active older adults into the classrooms of Title I elementary schools. But Doc Keenan founded that organization principally to combat social isolation, to put older people in classrooms with young children who need some additional attention from a caring older adult. And we all need to be thinking generally in intergenerational terms, because it also combats ageism, which is the other thing that is a hurdle to trying to get more resources, better innovation, more people thinking about how to better meet the needs of older Americans, is ageism. And so if going forward, if you had a magic wand, what would it look like, Melissa?
Well, so I have a couple of different thoughts. I mean, I think that social isolation, has been a big problem for older adults in this country. It's the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. And so nobody wants that, but being socially isolated is that equivalent regarding health outcomes. And now everyone around the globe has experienced social isolation and the impact it's having on our health. So I think hopefully it will make people more sensitive and more aware. I mean, the UK has a minister for loneliness. So
Really?
England has, yes, it's a
Loneliness.
thing. And I think that's the fun part about my work is I will say stuff like that. And people are like, oh my gosh. And it's like, I know, but like there are people paying attention and it is such a big problem. But intergenerational housing is one solution to that we don't have to be socially isolated or alone. No one needs to be. So, the sky is the limit. There are European countries. There are actually pockets of, I think, neighborhoods even in the States where people are trying to put college students to live with older adults. But then there's also the working family. Somehow they get kind of left out. So I think that if you look at something and you're like, that is so terrible for that older adult, well, your next thought needs to be, am I going to want that when I get to be that age? And if the answer to that is no, then you have a responsibility to try to figure out a solution to that problem that you're looking at that you don't like the current answer to. And it's going to take all of us. It's going to take multiple sectors of our communities and business leaders and healthcare providers and teachers and everyone working, people in media to educate the public about what some of these options are.
Well, I like your idea about the Match.com for matching not just people with, right, but I'm saying why not a
find a granny,
find a granny. But what about just matching people, whether it's families with children or college students or older adults who live alone or whatever. But there's a lot of unused real estate sitting around. I mean, I live in an older neighborhood that was built post World War II. And there's a lot of people who've lived here for 40 years, whose families have grown and gone. And they live in they're small houses here, but they live in a 4-bedroom house by themselves. And, meanwhile, college kids are scrambling to try to find a place, right? And there's just nothing that tells you how to bring all of these people together so the people who have resources are matched with the people who need resources in a way that maybe they didn't think about. That's mutually beneficial.
Right. And see, that's what a young person who knows how to build an app could do. It could be, the housing match, where if you're a college student and you're going to go to George Mason and you're like, I just want to rent a room, but it's, and I think a lot of older adults are probably scared. Like they don't want, and I would be scared too when you think about the financial exploitation, the amount of elder abuse and neglect that goes on now. But that's the bad side. That's the dark side of it. The other side of that is to be connected to, a good college kid or someone who's got a clean criminal background.
Right.
And if you can help each other, because, I think the ability to talk to someone is something that maybe this current generation maybe doesn't have such a strong skill set in because they're on their phones,
right.
So actually having a conversation where you look someone in the eye, that's a skill set that most older adults have because they grew up having to talk to people.
That's true.
So I think there's a lot of good.
And just having, living with an older adult or living with an adult that is not your parent is very different than living with your parents, because your parents, I've got 3 children in their 30s. You cannot mentor your own child. No one can. No one. Your children listen to someone else. There's not the emotional baggage. There's not the history. So when you talk about college students living with an adult who is not a family member, it is a different relationship from the very beginning because it's made of mutual respect. It's made based on the fact that you've chosen this arrangement. And I think people discount the benefit of that. They probably haven't even considered what would be the benefit of younger people having the attention and the time from older people who have it to give. And that's a waste of time right there.
Yeah, well, there's a huge mental health benefit to younger people. I mean, I think that right now, mental health in this country is already like a big issue. And then how do you think outside of the medical model when really it's kind of the social and emotional needs that need to be met? People don't need so much medication. Some people do, but how do you blend that with meeting their social and emotional needs across the lifespan, really? And so I think that we need to be thinking about how do we develop products and services and design communities and the built environment to support people of all ages. And if we do that, called age friendly. And we need to move towards that type of world. And so how do we help people think about that?
And I think it's very interesting that the answer seems to be pets. There's now more dogs than children in San Francisco. I think dogs and cats have taken the place of human connection. That's just my own theory. For those of you who are just joining us, this is Making Change Radio here on Radio Fairfax. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. And the change maker we are talking with tonight is Melissa Batchelor, PhD. She is a nurse educator, a researcher, and she is the host of her own podcast, This Is Getting Old. So let's talk about that. You know, I even saw something online. They now have mechanical dogs, like little robot dogs that mimic real dogs. And I'm thinking, okay, so this is the answer. I don't discount the benefit. I'm personally a dog lover, grew up with dogs. Give me a dog, I'd be happy. But are pets really the kind of being the substitute of where we put our love and affection and care and connection, because we haven't figured out a way to do it person to person in our communities?
Yeah. Well, and also a sense of purpose, because, everyone needs a sense of purpose. And so taking care of an animal is a purpose. But I do think that we really do as a society need to think about, how do we build human connection? How do we create opportunities for that? Because I think that's the structure that's missing the most. You think about when you move into a new neighborhood. I know myself, I moved to Northern Virginia 5 years ago. I was still working in North Carolina at Duke, living here in Northern Virginia. And so I actually have been in social isolation for 5 years because I was like, I don't have anybody in this area that I could call and go to lunch with. All of my work now is online. And, and so if there had been and so then you have to figure out, how do I navigate this community? How do I connect to other people? And so I've come a long way. I've managed to navigate that. But, if there was even a roadmap that told people, that said, here is a list of community organizations that you can get involved with. Here's how you can volunteer. Here's if you need a roommate or, want to help, maybe a poor college kid that can't afford their own 1-bedroom apartment. Here's a service that would help you connect to that. And so that's part of what I'm hoping to do through my own podcast, is connect people to the resources that are available in their community, and helping people solve problems. There are a lot of older adults that just need upkeep of their house. Well, if there's a high school student in a shop class, or a college student, those are the people that would be great for this person to hire to come in and do, practice the carpentry or the electrical stuff, that they're the trades that they're learning, and actually help the older adult by fixing their home so that they can age in place. And so I think I have lots of ideas of how all the different things that we could do. But
well, it's interesting. Tom, my husband Tom, who was in the MBA program at the University of Georgia, and he talks about how he rented a basement apartment from a man in Athens, Georgia, and he paid a very modest sum, but he mowed the grass and he did things like change the light bulbs. And he was a widower. The man he lived with was a widower, and Tom always felt like it was mutually beneficial because he wasn't as lonely with Tom around. Tom had privacy because he was in the basement, but the things that he was no longer able to do, Tom did as a college student. And I'm like, so that was a naturally occurring thing back in 1971. A naturally occurring thing that we've kind of moved away from, which is a shame.
Right. And, home cooked meals, if you're, so that, there's just there's a lot of benefit to reimagining, and thinking about, why do we live the way that we live? Why are these developments being built the way that they are? Why aren't we thinking more about some of the age-friendly initiatives and things that we could do to make the world a better place for all of us? And I think it's really just...
There's some great housing examples out there, like Green Spring, locally here in Northern Virginia. People generally know Green Spring because many people know someone who's been there. I've had family members who started out in independent housing and then moved to assisted living and then moved to skilled care. And so Green Spring has been around for a long time. And there are other communities like that, Ashby Pond out in Loudoun County. So we do have developers who are trying to build something that acknowledges the need for sort of a progression as people get older and want to live independently.
But that's still segregated. And
That's
so
true.
let's put all the older adults over here. And what
True.
I want people to do is think about, how do we build that development with those levels of care, but build in intergenerational interaction to where, maybe it's a 2-bedroom apartment with, a younger person and an older person, or maybe it's a family living with an older person, to where that mutual benefit, whatever it is, that would be like a choice. Like, what are the things that you need? And then it would match you. You have a compatibility score.
Right.
So like a not eHarmony, but it could be like, an aging harmony type
Something. But
service.
I'm with you. Somebody needs to do that thing. There's a wonderful book of fiction written by Frederick Bachman called A Man Called Ova. And they actually made it into a movie. But the book itself is this man who's a widower, and he's decided he's going to call it quits. But this family moves in next door. And this whole book is about what you're talking about. The connection. The fact that once you connect with people, it's much harder to not feel a sense of purpose and you have meaning in your life when you have people who care about you and people you care about. And I just think that we've allowed culturally ourselves to be separated from our neighbors and people in our community. And, the get off my lawn generation, we kind of all joke about, but, here in Fairfax City, there's a contingent of, we don't want college students in our neighborhood because they're loud and they throw parties. But, there is something to be said for having people of all generations living together. We're social animals. Human beings were meant to be social creatures. That is our normal state of being. So to live alone in an apartment or to live alone in a house and have limited contact, and you're so right that one of the things that COVID clearly showed us is how social isolation is detrimental to everyone's mental health. It's not how people were intended to live.
Right. And so we need to do better.
We do. For those of you who are just joining us, actually, we're going to be more upbeat here in the last few minutes of our show. This is Making Change Radio here on Radio Fairfax, and we are talking with Melissa Batchelor, PhD, and you can find her on Instagram and on Twitter. You can find her on YouTube, and you can find her podcast, This Is Getting Old, wherever you find your other podcasts. And so, Melissa, going forward, we need young people to take an interest in being the innovators of the future. And we need universities to, raise up the fact that there's so much opportunity here to research, to be an entrepreneur, to be a policymaker when it comes to issues affecting older people, which all of us are going to be one day. So how do we fan the flame, getting people excited about this?
So I would say it's not just universities, it's our community colleges and our high schools also. And I think that, when you start working with older adults, the reciprocal benefit and the relationship that you build with them, it's emotionally rewarding. And so I think that is the piece that really would fan the flame, is that you actually you could build that human connection that everyone needs throughout your life. I know that one of actually the best recruitment tools we have for getting people to move into the aging space is to create these opportunities for younger adults to interact with an older adult. I mean, you think about the number of people that never met their grandparents. Like I can remember one of the applications I wrote for one of my scholarships. It said, how did you become interested in aging? And it's like, well, I knew, all 4 of my great grandparents. Actually, I knew one of my great grandmothers. All 4 of my great grandparents lived till the last one died when I was a senior in high school. I still have 3 living grandparents, and I'm 48 years old. There are not a lot of 48-year-olds that can say that. And so I've always, seen the benefit of interacting with older adults, and I've always loved it. But a lot of people don't have that opportunity. So I think that it's whatever is your passion. Like if you're all into technology, think about how you could build something that would benefit an older adult, I mean, there's a market for that. If you're into healthcare, the majority of people that are going to require care are older adults, even if you're working in a hospital. And then I have, students who are like going to work in OBGYN, like on the labor and delivery unit. And they're like, oh, I don't have to worry about this. And I'm like, oh yeah, you will, because you're going to have an older grandparent that comes to visit, and you're going to have to navigate meeting their emotional needs to hold that grandbaby or that great grandbaby. So I think when people look at aging, you need to see the benefit of it, and to see the positives that are associated with aging. And I think it's getting over the ageism, and that's really going to be the biggest hurdle. But there's actually this other project called Sea Change, where they've looked at books of grandparents or older adults that aren't part of your family. They do have an influence on young kids, and you form your ideas about aging when you're young. And so the Sea Change project is compiling a book list and trying to create a curriculum that shows positive models of aging. Because otherwise, I think that when you don't know something, you tend to default to the ageist thought patterns, because that's all you've ever seen before. But when the majority of older adults are thriving, they're in our communities, and they're doing well, and we just need to figure out how to engage and support them, because then we reap the benefit of having helped them to do whatever it is that they need to do. But it's also good for us too.
Yes, in Grand Evolve, we call it the Encore chapter. When people have decided that they want to do something different, I personally think we should banish the word retirement. When you want to do something different from your career, then you have an encore chapter, maybe several encore chapters. And this is an opportunity to decide what you want to do that you love, or what you want to do that has meaning, or what you want to do that is going to give back to your community. So I just want to say I appreciate you, Melissa, because you continue to shine a light on these issues, and you make them accessible for people in our community who maybe haven't thought about them. You've inspired me to go out and figure out a way to work with the Planning Commission on how we can rethink development. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And this is Making Change Radio here on Radio Fairfax every Thursday night at 9 p.m.